They forced her to shift to shame her bloodline. Then the Starlight wolf awakened, and the goddess statue chose her, a true life story. Written in third person. 1. Part 1. What remains of a name? The pack knew her father's story, the way you know a scar, not because you were there when it happened, but because it became part of the landscape. Darren Voss had failed his alpha trial. He had run from the ritual circle on the night of the winter moon, leaving behind his wolf skin, his pack rights, and 2 years later, a daughter he named Mara. He died when she was 9. The pack kept the story alive like it was their job. Mara was 24 when the story found her again. She lived in a single room on the east edge of the pack's territory, the edge where the houses got smaller, and the path lights flickered, and nobody fixed them because the people who lived there weren't the kind of people whose complaints got heard. The room had one window that faced a concrete wall, a stove with one working burner, and a single shelf above the bed where she kept 3 things: a cracked mug her mother had owned, a paperback novel with the spine broken in 4 places, and nothing else. She had gotten rid of the nothing else over the years, one item at a time, whenever the weight of owning things had started to feel heavier than the comfort. She worked at the pack's grain storage facility, loading, logging, stacking. She was good at it, efficient. She came early and left late and did not make friends, not because she was unfriendly, but because friendships require a kind of openness that costs something, and she had learned a long time ago that she was not allowed to run a deficit. There was one time, 3 years ago, when a woman named Priya from the South Grain Shift had started eating lunch near her. Not with her, near her, the important difference between choosing proximity and requesting company. Priya had a loud laugh and strong opinions about the pallet stacking system and did not seem to require reciprocation in conversation, which made her the only person in Mara's recent memory who was genuinely comfortable to be around. They had eaten near each other for 4 months. Then someone had told Priya about the bloodline, about Duran, about the failure. Priya had come to work the next Monday with the specific air of someone who has made a decision that made them feel worse. She had been kind about it. That was the part that had cost the most. She had been so kind that Mara had been forced to be kind back, which meant maintaining the expression of someone receiving something generous instead of someone watching the last version of a thing dissolve while someone apologized for the dissolving. She had eaten alone after that. She had not resented Priya. She had filed it under things that already happened, right next to all the other things, and she had kept the count at 41 cracks, and the ceiling at 14, and the mug washed every morning, and that had been enough. It had been enough because it had to be. Those 2 things are not the same. Every morning she washed her single mug before she left. Every morning she folded her collar up before she walked through the pack's central territory, not because it was cold. Every morning she counted the cracks in the east path as she walked, 41 of them, from her door to the storage facility gate, and she knew every single one by shape. This is not a story about a woman who didn't notice what was being done to her. This is a story about a woman who noticed everything and filed it all very carefully under things that already happened. The summons came on a Tuesday, not in person. Pack summons to people like Mara didn't come in person. They came through the message board at the central hall, a paper notice pinned between a reminder about the water ration schedule and an advertisement for second-hand work boots. She almost missed it. She almost walked past it the way she walked past everything in the central hall. Eyes forward, pace steady, not giving anyone the chance to make her the subject of a look. But she saw her name, Mara Voss, in the clean block letters the Alpha's administrative office used for official notices. Her stomach did a thing she refused to name. The notice said she was to appear at the naming circle on the night of the new moon, 3 days from now, for her final wolf trial. It said this was her 3rd and last opportunity under pack law. It said that failure to appear would be treated as voluntary relinquishment of bloodline rights. It also said, and this was the part that made her jaw lock, that the trial would be conducted in front of the full pack assembly. She stood there reading it for longer than she meant to. Then she unpinned it from the board, folded it in quarters, and put it in her coat pocket. She walked home. She made tea in her cracked mug. She sat on the edge of her bed and counted the cracks in the ceiling. 14. Same as yesterday. She had tried the trial before. Twice. Both times at the standard age. 17 and then 20. The 2 checkpoints pack law allowed. Both times, the wolf had not come. She had stood in the circle with her hands shaking and her eyes closed and reached deep into the place, inside herself, where they told her the wolf was supposed to live, and found only dark and quiet and the sound of her own breathing. The pack had watched both times. Politely, the first time. Less so, the second. Someone had said, afterward, that it figured, that the bloodline had already proven what it was, that Darren's daughter carrying Darren's weakness was just biology being honest. She had been 20 years old. She had walked home. She had washed her mug. She had not cried, and she was proud of that in the way you're proud of things that cost you something enormous to maintain. Card 2. The night of the new moon. The naming circle was older than the pack. That was something nobody talked about, the way you don't talk about the foundation of a house you've built your whole life on top of. The stones were dark and flat and worn smooth in the center, from 300 years of wolves shifting, failing, or doing something in between. The torches around the outer ring were the same torches they always used, iron staves, open flame, nothing electric. The pack liked its rituals old. It made the rituals feel more real, which made the failures feel more permanent. Mara arrived last. She had been told to arrive last. The notice had said it in the kind of language that sounds like instruction but is actually stage management. She was meant to walk in after everyone else was already standing in the ring, so that the entrance was watched, so that the embarrassment was maximized, so that what happened next had the most possible audience. She knew this. She walked in anyway. 43 people stood in the ring. She counted them without meaning to. It was just something she did, the same way she counted cracks and ceiling tiles and working burners. Some of them she recognized. Rella, who used to bring food to her mother when she was sick. Old Bryn, who had known her father and always looked at her with something she could never quite categorize. The Harmon brothers, who worked the North Grain shift and had never said a word to her that wasn't about work, but who now stood with their arms crossed and their faces set in the particular neutral expression of people who have decided something isn't their responsibility. Alpha Dagon Voss stood at the center of the circle. He was her father's brother. He had taken everything her father had left behind, the house, the pack position, the land rights, the social standing, and had run the pack for 15 years with the competence of a man who understood that power is mostly just the willingness to hold it firmly and never let anyone see your hands shake. He was not a cruel man. Cruelty requires a kind of personal investment. He was just a man who had calculated, very early in his career, that Mara's existence was more useful as a cautionary tale than as a responsibility. He said her name, her full name, with the bloodline attached. He said the bloodline the way you say the name of a problem that other people have already agreed is not your problem. She stood at the edge of the circle and looked at the stone floor. 47 cracks. A new one since last winter. She added it to the count. She thought about her father for exactly 3 seconds. His hands, how large they were, how they smelled of pine resin and the particular soap he made himself from a recipe his own mother had taught him, the way he used to sing while he worked, badly, without embarrassment, the way only people who feel genuinely safe in their own skin can sing badly. She put the memory away, filed it, moved on. Dagon was speaking. He was explaining the law to an audience that knew the law perfectly well, which meant he was not explaining the law. He was setting the scene, creating the frame, making sure everyone understood that what was about to happen was legitimate, procedural, sad but necessary. She heard the word bloodline 3 more times. She heard the word failure twice. She heard the word opportunity once, in the sentence where he explained that she had been given every opportunity. Then he looked at her and said, "When you're ready." The politeness of it was the worst part, not the hostility, the politeness, the way it dressed what was happening in the clothes of fairness. She stepped into the center of the circle. The stone was cold through her boots. She could feel each seam between the slabs. The floor's texture was something she knew with the bottoms of her feet the way she knew it with her eyes. She stood in the middle and she closed her eyes and she breathed. She reached for the wolf. It was the same reaching she had done twice before. Down through the layers of herself, past the careful surfaces, past the filed-away things, into the deep place where the wolf was supposed to be waiting. She reached the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room you've lived in your whole life, with the certainty that the switch is there, even when your hand can't find it. Nothing. Not silence, exactly. Something thicker than silence. Something that felt less like absence and more like distance, like calling into a valley and knowing something is down there, but the valley is deeper than your voice can reach. She heard someone in the ring shift their weight. She heard a very quiet, very contained sound that was almost a laugh. She kept her eyes closed. She kept reaching. Dagon raised his hand. She didn't see it. She felt it. Felt the change in the air, the way the audience adjusted, the way the energy of the ring shifted from tense waiting to the particular release of tension that comes when something expected finally happens. He was going to signal the end. She knew that. She was aware, in the very steady, very quiet way she was aware of most things, that in approximately 4 seconds her bloodline rights would be removed in front of 43 people, and that the pack would file this moment under, sad but true, and that she would walk home and wash her mug and count her ceiling cracks, and that would be it. That would be the whole of it. She had already started the process of filing it away. Then the statue moved. Not dramatically, not with sound or wind or any of the things that happen in the stories they tell children about the goddess. The ancient stone figure at the north end of the circle, older than the ring, older than the pack, carved by hands that had no name in any history the pack kept, turned its face. It had been looking east. It was now looking at Mara. 43 people saw it. They would later agree, without being asked, without coordinating, and without making eye contact with each other while they did it, that they had not. Part 3. What came up from the floor? The shift did not come from her chest. It did not come from her throat, which was where every shifter she had ever spoken to had described it coming from, that rising feeling, like heat climbing, like something cracking open from the inside. It came from the bottoms of her feet, from the cracks in the stone floor she had been counting since she was 17 years old. It came up through the soles of her boots, through the bones of her feet, up her legs and into her spine, the way cold travels through metal. Not warmth, not fire, not the dramatic eruption she had imagined every time she had tried before. It was more like recognition, like a door in the floor she had been walking over for years finally deciding to open. She felt the wolf before she saw it. It was vast. That was the first thing. Not large in the way wolves are large in the way that old things are large. Things that have been waiting so long that their size has become something different from size. Something that took up space in a way that had nothing to do with physical dimension. Her bones answered. That was the only way she would ever describe it afterward, in the one conversation she allowed about it. Her bones answered. The way you answer a door when someone knocks who has been standing outside for a very long time. She shifted. The ring went very still. The wolf that stood in the center of the naming circle was not gray, not brown, not the silver-white of the pack's alpha bloodline or the dark charcoal of the Harmon family or any color she had ever seen on a shifting wolf in the pack's territory. It was the color of the hour before dawn, not the dramatic pre-sunrise with its oranges and pinks. The earlier hour than that, the one most people sleep through, when the sky cannot decide what it is, and the light is neither dark nor light, but something in between, that has no name in the language most people use. That was the color of her coat, and when the torchlight hit it, the light didn't bounce off the way it bounced off other wolves. It went in, like the coat was drinking it. Dagon's hand was still raised. He did not lower it. He also did not complete the gesture. He stood in the center of the circle with his arm extended at the angle of finality, and he looked at the wolf in front of him, and something moved behind his eyes that he would spend a considerable amount of time over the following weeks making sure no one had noticed. Someone in the ring inhaled very fast through their nose. Rella pressed her hand to her mouth. The wolf did not look at Dagon. The wolf did not look at any of them. It looked at the North Stone, at the statue, at the open hand. The hand had always been open. 300 years, and nobody had asked why. Nobody had asked why the goddess was carved with her palm up and her fingers spread, as if she were waiting to give something, or as if she had already given it and was showing the empty hand as proof. The pack used the circle for shifting rituals. They walked past the statue 4 times a year for seasonal ceremonies. They knew every stone by name. They had never asked about the hand. The light came out of it quietly. Not warm, not golden, not sacred-looking the way light in stories is supposed to look. It was cold and precise, and it had the quality of something that had been stored for a very long time in a very small space, and was now, carefully and without ceremony, being released. It touched the wolf between the shoulder blades, Mara, who was inside the wolf, which was also inside Mara, which was the same thing from 2 different angles, felt it the way you feel a correct answer, not like revelation, not like miracle, like diagnosis, like being told the name of something you have had for years and didn't know how to describe. You were never the last of a dying line. You were the first of one they didn't have the language to see. She didn't hear those words. They didn't come from outside. They came from the same place the shift had come from, up through the floor, through the cracks, through the stone that was older than all of them. She understood them the way you understand things that were always true. 10. Part 4. The sound 43 people make when they recalculate. Nobody cheered. That is the part that matters. That is the part she would remember more clearly than the shift itself, more clearly than the light, more clearly than any of it. Nobody cheered. Cheering would mean they had been rooting for her. What happened instead was something that didn't have a common name in any language she knew, a collective sound, or rather the absence of sound, that was made up of 43 people recalibrating an entire social architecture in real time. You could hear it in the way the air changed, in the way people's weight shifted from one foot to the other, in the specific quality of silence that follows when a thing you were certain about turns out to be wrong, and the wrongness is large enough that you cannot immediately calculate how far back you have to go to find where the certainty started. The Harmon brothers, who had stood with crossed arms and set faces, had uncrossed their arms. Rella had her hand still pressed to her mouth, but her eyes were different now. Old Bryn, who had always looked at Mara with that unnameable expression, Mara could see now, across the circle, that the expression had always been grief. That old Bryn had always known, or suspected, or hoped, and had never said anything, and was now standing in the firelight with the particular stillness of someone who has been carrying a thing for a very long time and has just been told they can set it down. Dagon lowered his hand, slowly, not in defeat. She watched him carefully. She had spent 24 years being careful about men who held power over her, and she was very good at reading the small movements. He lowered his hand the way a chess player moves a piece back from an overextended position, deliberate, controlled, already calculating what the new board looked like. He was not broken. He was adjusting. He said her name. Mara. Just that. No bloodline attached this time. The wolf looked at him. She looked at him. She noted the absence of the bloodline from his pronunciation and filed it carefully under things to remember. She shifted back. This came as easily as the first shift had come hard, like exhaling after a long hold. She was standing in the center of the circle, in her own skin and her own clothes, and her boots were still on, which she found oddly important. She had kept her boots on. She had not been undone by this. She was still the woman who folded her collar up before walking through territory that had spent years pretending she wasn't there. The ring was quiet around her. She looked at the north stone. The statue was looking east again. The hand was open. Nothing had changed and everything had, and the stone knew the difference between those two things with a patience she was only beginning to learn. Someone started talking. It wasn't directed at her. It was the small talking of a crowd that needed to process something by making noise about something else. The torches, the cold, the hour, whether the ceremony was concluded. Pack business filling the space where understanding had not yet arrived. Dagon was speaking to his second. She could see his mouth moving, see the very contained quality of his gestures. She couldn't hear the words and didn't try to. Rella crossed the ring. She walked directly to Mara, which required crossing through the crowd, which nobody else was doing. She was a small woman, Rella, short and broad, and with the particular solidity of someone who has been practical her whole life out of necessity. She stopped in front of Mara and looked at her for a moment. "I brought food to your mother," she said, "when she was sick. You were too young to remember." "I remember," Mara said. Rella nodded. Something passed across her face. Not an apology. An apology would have required naming what she was apologizing for, and they both knew neither of them was ready for that conversation. "Walk home careful," Rella said. "The East Path lights are still out." "I know," Mara said. "I know all 41 of the cracks." Rella looked at her for another moment. Then she went back to the crowd. It was not a reunion. It was not forgiveness. It was a door, held open by 1 inch, in a wall that had been sealed for years. Mara noted it, filed it under things that might become something. Maybe. Part 5. What she did afterward. She went home. She washed her mug. Not because nothing had changed. Everything had changed and she knew it. She could feel it in the backs of her hands, in the soles of her feet where the shift had started, in the strange stillness of the wolf that was no longer far away but close, right beneath the surface, patient as the stone it had come up through. She washed the mug because the mug was hers. Because she had built habits that did not depend on whether things went right, and those habits were the architecture of herself, and she was not interested in trading them for the particular intoxication of being seen. She had watched enough people get drunk on being witnessed to know how the hangover felt. She made tea. She sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at the ceiling. 14 cracks. She thought about the way the wolf had felt. Not the shift itself. Not the mechanics of bones answering and skin reforming, but the feeling underneath all of that. The feeling of being the right size. Of occupying exactly the space she was supposed to occupy, with no apology and no reduction. She had spent 24 years making herself smaller, in increments so small she had not noticed she was doing it. The wolf had not been small. The wolf had never once been small, even when it was buried, even when it was too far down for the light to reach. It had waited in its full size, patient as the stone it lived beneath, holding the shape she had been trying to compress. She understood, lying on her bed in her clothes at 2 a.m. after the most significant thing that had ever happened to her, that this was what the pack had actually been afraid of. Not the failure, the size. A wolf that doesn't come is easy to dismiss. A wolf that comes in a form the pack has no category for is something else entirely. She filed this under things that explain a lot. She lay down in her clothes and looked at the ceiling for a long time, not sleeping, not crying, not doing any of the dramatic things the situation might have called for in a different kind of story. She was thinking, carefully, methodically, the way she did most things, about what the next weeks would look like. Dagon would move. Not publicly, not yet. Publicly, he would need to be seen as fair. The trial had concluded. The wolf had come. Pack law was clear. Bloodline rights restored. He would shake her hand at some point, or have someone else do it, and the pack would watch and file it under. All's well that ends well. But behind the public gesture, he would be adjusting. She needed to be ready for the adjustment. The wolf was very still inside her, with the stillness of something that has been waiting long enough to know that waiting is not the same as losing. In the morning she went to work. She loaded grain. She logged the numbers. She stacked the pallets in the order she always stacked them, which was not the order she had been told to stack them but was more efficient, and nobody had ever corrected her because the results spoke clearly. Torin, the shift supervisor who had worked beside her for 3 years and never said more than 8 words to her outside of work directives, found her at the break station at midday. He stood beside her. He poured his tea. He looked at the storage yard. "Heard the trial went well," he said. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. He drank his tea. She drank her tea. He went back to the yard. It was not much. It was also, for Torin, essentially a speech. 2 people came to her in the following days with apologies they had polished into something else. The first was one of the Harmon brothers, the younger one, Ket, who had the permanently uncomfortable look of a man who is aware of his own cowardice and wishes it were someone else's problem. He found her on the East Path on the third day and said he wanted her to know that what had been said about her family over the years had been, and here he paused for a long time, complicated. Yes, she said, it was. He seemed to expect something from her. Absolution, maybe. A gracious note that would let him walk away clean. She looked at him with the steady regard she had developed for situations that required nothing from her that she was not prepared to give. He said, "Right, well," and left. The second was a woman she knew by sight only, a mid-ranking pack member named Olis, who had been in the ring that night and who now appeared at the storage facility gate on the fourth day with a wrapped parcel of food that she held out with both hands and a face that was doing considerable work. "My grandmother knew your grandmother," Olis said. Mara accepted the parcel. "I didn't know that. They were close. Before everything." Olis looked at her feet, then back up. "I'm sorry I should have." She stopped. "Yes," Mara said gently. "You should have." Olis nodded. She left. She came back the following week with food again, and the week after that, and on the third week she stayed for tea, and they sat in the single window and did not talk about the circle, or the bloodline, or the statute, or any of it. They talked about the bad East Path lights that nobody was fixing, and about Olis's disagreement with the grain storage logging system which Mara happened to know was correct, and about the book on Mara's shelf, with the spine broken in 4 places. It was not a friendship yet. It was the thing that precedes a friendship, the slow, mutual recognition that you can stand each other for an hour without either of you needing to perform. Mara filed it under. Things that might become something. The first move was administrative. He assigned her new work duties. Still in storage, but with a slight shift in her schedule that put her on the same rotation as his most loyal pack members. She recognized this for what it was. Proximity as monitoring. He wanted eyes on her without the embarrassment of having it look like surveillance. She performed the new schedule without complaint. The second move was social. He invited her to the quarterly pack assembly, the one she had never been invited to in her entire 24 years of living on the east edge of the territory. The invitation came in the same clean block letter format as the summons had come. She recognized the handwriting of the administrative office. She folded it in quarters and put it in her coat pocket and went. He greeted her. In public, with the warmth of a man who has calculated exactly how much warmth the moment requires and is deploying precisely that amount. "We're glad to have you," he said. "Thank you," she said. People watched. People noted. People would carry what they saw back to their corners of the pack and interpret it through the particular lens of whatever they most needed to believe. That Dagon was gracious, that Mara was assimilating, that everything was proceeding correctly. She ate the food that was served. She listened to the meeting. She watched Dagon work the room with the practiced efficiency of a man who genuinely enjoyed the work of power, which she had always found more unsettling than people who hated it. People who love power manage it the way they love anything, with attention, with care, with the particular blindness of devotion. After the meeting, she walked home on the East Path. All 41 cracks, all 47 cracks in the circle floor, all 14 in the ceiling. She was counting differently now, not to cope, to keep track. The third move was the one that mattered. He called her to his office on a Wednesday morning, in person this time, which signaled that whatever was coming was not for the record. His office smelled of the good wood of the Alpha House, of coffee, of the particular dryness of a room where papers lived. He sat behind his desk. He looked up when she entered, which was more than he had done the last time she had stood in a doorway of his. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He said he had been thinking about the bloodline rights situation. He said the old law was clear, but the administration of those rights had historically been, he paused here for a word, uneven, in her family's case. He said he thought it was time to review what the bloodline rights actually entitled her to. She listened to all of this very carefully, the way you listen to a man who is showing you a cage while explaining that it's a gift. She had spent enough years around this man, never close to him, always at the exact distance that pack hierarchy enforced, but close enough to observe, to understand the way he moved. He was not stupid. She had made the mistake of wishing he were stupid. Once, when she was 17 and had just come back from the first failed trial. Stupid would have been easier. A stupid man holds power the way a child holds a rock. You can see what he's doing, and you can step aside. Dagon held power the way a craftsman holds a tool, with knowledge of its weight, its uses, its limits, and where it was most effective. That made him considerably more difficult to manage. But she had also noticed, sitting in this chair in this office that smelled of old wood and careful deliberation, that there was something new in the way he was looking at her. Not respect, exactly. Recalculation. The particular expression of a man who has built a very efficient system around a set of assumptions, and who has just discovered that one of his foundational assumptions was wrong, and who is now doing the rapid internal math of what else the error might have affected. She understood this expression because she knew it from the inside. She had been doing the same math for 3 weeks. The difference was that his math was about control, and hers was about something else. When he finished, she said, "What would that review involve?" He explained. The review would involve documentation, verification, a period of, he chose the word carefully, reintegration, several months, during which time her rights would be provisional. Provisional. There it was. She looked at him with the same steady regard she had given Ket on the East Path. She thought about the wolf beneath the surface, patient as stone. "I would need that in writing," she said. "The documentation, what is required, what the timeline is, what provisional means specifically under PAC law." Something shifted behind his eyes. Very small, very contained. "Of course," he said. "I'll have the office prepare something. I'll bring a witness to review it," she said. "Rella Orna has PAC law certification. Would that be acceptable?" He said it would. He said it smoothly, without hesitation, because hesitation would have told her something she already knew. She stood, said thank you, and left. On the East Path home, she thought about Rella's face at the meeting, the grief in old Bryn's stillness, the way Olis had come back for a 3rd week of tea. She thought about the circle, and the open hand, and the thing that had come up through the cracks in the stone, not given to her, but returned. The distinction mattered. She did not know yet exactly what she would do with it, but she knew she was done doing it alone. She stopped at the East Path message board. She left a note for Rella, short, specific. She said she might need help with a PAC law matter and asked if Rella was available to speak. She signed her name without the bloodline, just Mara, the way she had always thought of herself in the quiet of her own head. Then she went home. She washed her mug. She made tea. The wolf was very close now, not restless, not eager, just present, the way a patient thing is present after it has been waiting and finally stopped having to. Vol. Part 7. The Mirror. She bought it on a Saturday, from the salvage market on the west edge of town. Small. Rectangular. Frame of dull silver metal, slightly dented on one corner. The glass was good. No distortion. No dark spots. Just a clean reflection. She paid 2 coins for it, which was less than she expected and more than she had been planning to spend, and carried it home wrapped in paper under her arm. She hung it in the hallway, not in the bedroom, not in the bathroom where a mirror belonged, by the logic of other people's houses. In the hallway, the narrow space between the door and the room, the first thing she would pass every morning when she left, and every evening when she came home. She drove the nail, she hung the frame, she stepped back, she looked at herself. She did not do anything dramatic about what she saw, did not cry, did not reach out and touch the glass, did not stand there for a long time finding the profound moment in the reflection. She looked the way you look at something you have been avoiding for a long time and finally don't need to avoid anymore, briefly, clearly, with the simple factual acknowledgement that this is what you look like and that is fine. Then she went to make tea. Rella came on Sunday. She brought a copy of the PAC Law Compendium, the real one, thick, worn at the corners, annotated in the margins in 3 different sets of handwriting from the 3 different people who had used it before her. She sat at Mara's table and opened it, and they talked for 2 hours. Rella knew the law the way people know things they have had personal reason to understand deeply. She had been a mid-rank PAC member for 30 years. She had watched pack law be applied consistently and selectively both, and she knew which sections were genuinely binding and which ones had enough interpretive flexibility to be shaped by whoever was doing the interpreting. The Bloodline rights review he's proposing, Rella said, her finger on a page. This section here. It was written for reinstating rights after voluntary relinquishment, not after a failed trial. You didn't relinquish, you were waiting. Those are legally distinct categories. Mara leaned over and read the section. So the provisional period doesn't apply, Rilla said. Your rights restored the moment the trial completed. There's nothing to review. She looked up. He knows this. Yes, Mara said. He does. They sat with that for a moment. You'll need to respond in writing, Rella said, formally, before he has documentation prepared that assumes you've agreed to the review process. Once you're in the process, it's much harder to argue you shouldn't be. Can you help me write it? Yes, Rella said, without hesitation. The same way she had, 30 years ago, brought food to a sick woman on the east edge of the territory, not because it was convenient, but because it was the kind of thing you do when you have been watching things go wrong for long enough that you have finally run out of reasons not to. They wrote the letter together at Mara's table. It was formal and precise, and it cited 3 specific sections of the Pack Law Compendium, one per the situation, and it was polite in the way that legal documents are polite, which is to say, it left no room for interpretation. It acknowledged Dagan's invitation for review. It noted that under Pack Law sections, and it named them, restoration of bloodline rights upon successful trial completion was immediate and unconditional. It stated that she would not be participating in the review process as it did not apply to her situation. It thanked him for his attention to the matter. Rilla read it twice. Good, she said. Short. Doesn't give him anything to argue with. Or apologize for, Mara said. Rilla looked at her. No. No apology. You don't owe this conversation an apology. She submitted the letter through the PAC's administrative office on Monday morning. The same office that had sent her the summons. The same clean block letter notice board. She handed the envelope to the clerk and said it was for Alpha Dagan, formal correspondence regarding Bloodline Rights Administration, and she needed a receipt confirming delivery. The clerk, a young woman named Perry who had been in the ring that night and who had the specific quality of guilt that manifests as excessive helpfulness, gave her the receipt. Thank you, Mara said. She walked home. She passed the east path, all 41 cracks. She had counted them again. In the hallway, she passed the mirror. She glanced at herself the way you glance at a neighbor you're friendly with. Brief, acknowledging, carrying on. Part 8. What the Wolf Knows. 2 weeks after the letter, Dagan sent a response through the administrative office. It was brief. It acknowledged her clarification of the legal position and confirmed that no further review process would be initiated. It was signed by his administrative staff, not by him directly, which told her exactly how much he had wanted to write it. She folded it, filed it, not under things that already happened, under things to keep. The wolf ran for the first time on the night of the next full moon. Not in the naming circle, not in front of anyone. Mara walked out of the east edge of the territory at 2 in the morning, past the last flickering path light, into the wide stretch of forest that backed up against the territory's outer boundary. She had walked this stretch for years. It was part of her route. She knew every tree by the texture of its bark in the dark. But she had never run here. She shifted without trying. That was what surprised her most. The ease of it, like stepping through a door that had always been there and was now just open. She shifted and the wolf was there, the pre-dawn color of her coat swallowing the moonlight the same way it had swallowed the torchlight, and she ran. Not away from anything, not toward anything specific, just running, which the wolf had apparently needed to do for 24 years and was not going to waste time on metaphor about. She ran until her legs said stop. She stopped. She lay down in the dry leaves of the forest floor and breathed. Above her, through the canopy, the moon was bright and indifferent and old. She had not been to this part of the forest since she was 12 years old. Her father used to bring her here. Not to run. He couldn't run, not by then, The pack had already stripped the voluntary parts of his shifting rights while they argued over the involuntary parts. But to walk, he had known the names of the trees. Not the scientific names, the old names, the ones from the region before the pack had settled here, the names that described the trees by character rather than by category. That one with the long-reaching lower branches was called the greeter. The cluster of thin silver birches near the creek was called the argument. The enormous old oak at the center of the stretch, the one that had been old when the pack arrived, had no name at all, because some things are too old to be named by the people who find them. She lay in the leaves under that oak now. Her father had sat against its roots and sung to her, badly, without embarrassment. He had told her stories about the bloodline, not the pack's version, his version, the real version, or at least the one he had been told, which was that the Voss line had always produced wolves that the pack's testing structures didn't know how to measure, that the failures in the trial records were not failures but incompatibilities, that the wolf and the measuring system had simply never been designed for each other. He had said all of this to a 12-year-old. She had understood approximately 40% of it at the time. She understood it now completely, lying under the old oak in the dark, with the pre-dawn wolf resting in her bones. She wished she could tell him. She didn't know what she would say. She thought she would probably just sit here, the way they used to sit, and let the forest be quiet around them, and that would be enough. That would be the whole of it. She lay in the leaves for a while longer. Then she got up. She thought about what the light from the statue's open hand had felt like. The coldness of it. The precision. Like being told a true thing by something that had no reason to lie. She had been the last of a dying line, in the pack's telling. Duran's daughter, with Duran's failure bred into her like bad grain. But the goddess was older than the pack. The circle stones were older than the pack. And the wolf that had come up through the cracks in those stones was not Duran's failure. It was something the pack's way of measuring things had never had the right scale for. She was not restored. She had never been destroyed. Those were two different stories, and only one of them was true. She shifted back and walked home. The east path was dark. Still no repairs to the lights. It had been months. She had noted this in 3 separate maintenance requests through the pack facility system, and they had been acknowledged and not acted on. She walked it anyway. She knew every crack. In the hallway she passed the mirror. She stopped this time. She stood in front of it in the dark of the hall and looked at herself. In her coat, her collar up, the particular steadiness of a face that has spent a long time learning not to move when it does not want to. She looked for a long moment. Then she let her collar down. Not as a decision exactly. Not as a gesture toward anything. The night was not cold. The coat collar had never been about the cold. She let it down the way you stop doing something you started, for reasons that no longer apply. She went to bed. The wolf settled beneath the surface, patient, close, content to wait for the next run. It had waited 24 years. It was very good at waiting, and it had learned. They had both learned, Mara and the wolf, which were also the same thing, that waiting is not the same as losing. Dagon still held the alpha seat. He would hold it for years, probably, and he would manage it with the careful efficiency he had always brought to the work. The Harmon brothers still had their positions, and their crossed arms, and their talent for remembering history, in the version that asked the least of them. The path lights on the east edge were still broken. The central hall still smelled of old coffee, and the particular anxiety of communal living. And the notice board still held its rotation of announcements that mattered to some people and not others. Some things changed. Rila became a regular presence in Mara's single room on Sunday afternoons. Tea, the compendium, sometimes a card game that Rila was significantly better at and did not pretend otherwise. Olis came on alternating weeks with food that got more elaborate as the weeks went on, which Mara understood was Olis's particular language for saying something she hadn't figured out how to say directly yet. Old Bryn found her at the storage facility one morning and said he had known her father, that her father had been a good man who had been badly frightened, and that the pack had made a mistake in how they had treated that fear. He said this standing in the yard, in the middle of the workday, at a normal volume, in front of Torin, who was pretending to check his clipboard. He said it, and then he went back to his duties. It was not absolution. Absolution was not something old Bryn could offer, and Mara wasn't looking for it. It was a witness, a person saying, "I saw what happened, and I am saying that it happened." That was a different thing, a smaller and more real thing, the kind of thing that doesn't undo the past but does make the present a place where you can stand without pretending the past didn't happen. The administrative rights documentation went through in the 3rd month. Rella helped her file it. It was a 4-page form. She had been prepared for more, and it restored her pack land rights, her voting rights in pack assembly, and her access to the social support systems she had been quietly excluded from for 24 years. She signed it at the same administrative desk where she had submitted her letter. Perry, the clerk, gave her the receipt with the excessive helpfulness of continued guilt. "Thank you," Mara said. She walked out of the hall into the main street of the territory's center. She had walked this street before, thousands of times, in the 24 years of living on its edge, but she had always walked it with the particular invisible quality she had cultivated, the not taking up too much space walk, the collar-up walk, the eyes-forward walk. She walked it differently now, not with swagger, not with the dramatic "I have arrived" quality of someone who has waited for their moment. She just walked, at her natural pace, which was quick, with her collar down, because the day was not cold, with her eyes moving, because there was a lot to see, and she had always been good at seeing, and there was no longer a reason to pretend she wasn't. She passed the notice board. She slowed down. She looked at it. There was a listing for a pack housing transfer, a room becoming available on the territory's 2nd ring, a room that was twice the size of her current room and had 2 working burners. She stood and read the listing. She calculated the transfer fee against her current pack stipend, which was now correctly adjusted for her bloodline rights. She took out a pen. She wrote down the reference number. She went home. She washed her mug. She packed nothing, because the transfer wasn't finalized yet, and she had not gotten ahead of herself in 24 years, and she was not going to start. But she stood in her single room and looked at the cracked mug on the shelf, the 4-spined novel, the nothing else that was no longer anything else. She thought, I could put more on that shelf, not dramatically, not with the weight of metaphor, just practically, truthfully. There was room on the shelf, and there were things she had avoided acquiring for years because owning things had felt like claiming a permanence she hadn't been sure she was entitled to, and that calculation had changed. She could put more on the shelf. In the hallway she passed the mirror. She stopped. She looked at herself for a long time, the kind of long that isn't dramatic, but is just complete, the way you look at something when you are not in a hurry and you are not afraid of what you will see. She looked at the face of a woman who had spent 24 years learning how to survive a story that other people had decided was hers, and who had learned it so well that she had almost started to believe the story was the truth. She looked at the face of a woman who had stood in a stone circle in front of 43 people and reached down through the floor for the wolf that was older than all of them. She looked at the face of a woman who had washed her mug every morning even when there was no reason to believe the morning was worth the washing. She knew this face. She had always known this face. She just hadn't been looking. She went to make tea. The wolf settled. The wolf waited. The tea was the same tea she had been making for 3 years in this room. A coarse loose-leaf blend from the market on the west edge, the cheapest functional option she had found, the one that tasted approximately like tea without tasting like anything else in particular. She poured the water. She waited the 3 minutes. She poured it into the cracked mug and stood at the one working burner and let the warmth come through the ceramic into her palms. She thought about the housing transfer form in her coat pocket. She thought about the shelf and what might go on it. Not abstractly, specifically. She had a way of approaching problems that worked better with specifics. She had learned this about herself, the same way she had learned the cracks on the path, through repetition and attention. So she thought specifically. There was a bookshop 3 blocks from the pack's administrative hall that she had walked past for 3 years without going into, because entering the bookshop would have been a form of claiming something, and she had gotten good at not claiming things. She could go in. She could buy one book, a book with an intact spine, which was a thing she had not owned in a long time. She could go to the salvage market and see if there was a second mug. These were not large ambitions. She was aware of that. She was not interested in large ambitions right now. Large ambitions required a foundation, and she was still in the part where you check the ground before you build, where you make sure the floor is solid before you start stacking things on it. The ground had held. The wolf had come up through it. That was a very good sign for the foundation. Outside, the east path lights were still broken. She had submitted a fourth maintenance request. They would fix it. Maybe not immediately. But they would fix it, now that the person filing the request was a person whose complaints got heard. Not because she had become more worth hearing, she had always been that, but because the world had finally been moved to the position where it could see what had been there the whole time. The door in the hallway closed softly behind her. The mirror reflected an empty hall. The mug steamed. Outside nothing had changed. Inside everything had.